peace without disruption to the dreamer. It's just that Case 6 demonstrated more spiritual artistry. Transference through children. When souls have difficulty reaching the mind of a troubled adult, they might resort to using children as conduits for their messages. Children are more receptive to spirits because they have not been conditioned to doubt or resist the supernatural. Frequently, the young person chosen as a conduit is a family member of the departed. This situation is helpful to the spirit who is trying to reach a surviving relative, especially in the same household. The next case is that of a man who died of a heart attack in his backyard at age 42. Case 7. Dr. N. What do you do to comfort your wife at the moment of death? Subject. At first I try to hug Irene with my energy, but I don't have the hang of it yet. Subject is a level 2. I can relate to her sorrow, but nothing I'm doing is working. I'm worried because I don't want to leave without saying goodbye. Dr. N. Just relax now and move slowly forward. I want you to explain to me how you work through this dilemma. Subject. I soon realized that I ought to be able to console Irene a little by reaching her through Sarah, our 10-year-old. Dr. N. Why do you think Sarah might be receptive to you? Subject. My daughter and I have a special bond. She also has great sorrow over my passing, but much of this is mixed with fear over what happened to me so suddenly. Sarah doesn't comprehend it all yet. There are too many neighbors crowding around trying to sustain my wife. No one is paying much attention to Sarah, sitting alone in our bedroom. Dr. N. Do you look upon this as an opportunity? Subject. Yes, I do. In fact, Sarah senses I am still alive, and so she is more open to accepting my vibrations as I move into the bedroom. Dr. N. Good. What happens next between you and your daughter? Subject takes a deep breath. I've got it. Sarah is holding a set of her mother's knitting needles. I send warmth through them into her hands, and she feels this right away. Then I use the needles as a springboard to reach her spine at the base of the neck and work around to her chin. Subject stops and begins laughing. Dr. N. What is making you happy? Subject. Sarah is giggling because I'm tickling her chin like I did before she went to sleep every night. Dr. N. Now what do you do? Subject. The crowd is breaking up and leaving because I have been taken out to the street and placed into an ambulance. Irene comes alone into the bedroom and gets ready for a neighbor who will drive her to the hospital. She also wants to check on our daughter. Sarah looks up at my wife and says, Mommy, you don't have to leave. Daddy is here with me. I know because I can feel him tickling my chin. Dr. N. And then what does your wife do? Subject. Irene is tearful but not crying as hard as before because she doesn't want to scare Sarah. So she hugs our daughter. Dr. N. Irene does not want to indulge in what she believes to be Sarah's fantasy about your being with her? Subject. Not yet, but I'm ready for Irene now. As soon as my wife holds our daughter, I jump the gap between them, sending energy flowing over both. Irene feels me too, although not as much as Sarah. They sit down on the bed and hold on to each other with their eyes closed. For a while, all three of us are alone together. Dr. N. Do you feel you have accomplished what you set out to do on this day? Subject. Yes, it's enough. It is time for me to leave, and I pull back away from them and float out of the house. Then I am high over the countryside and sucked up into the sky. Soon I move into bright light, where my guide comes to meet me. Contact in familiar settings. It may seem from the last case that once the departing soul has reached out and touched those who care about them, they go off to the spirit world without bothering to be near us again. There are people who don't feel a soul's presence right after death, but will in the future. Survivors who have reached the acceptance stage in their grief process would find solace in knowing those they have loved are still watching over them. Yet there are those who never pick up anything. Souls don't give up easily on us. Another way spirits touch people is through environmental settings associated with their memory. These contacts are effective to minds which may be closed to all other forms of spiritual communication. The following case illustrates this method. My subject, a woman called Nancy in her last life, died of a sudden stroke after 38 years of marriage to Charles. Her husband was stuck between the denial and anger stages of grief, and his emotions were so pent up that he could not accept help from their friends or seek outside professional counseling. As an engineer, his predominantly analytical mind rejected any spiritual approach to his loss as being unscientific. Nancy's soul had tried reaching her husband in several ways for months after the funeral. His stoic nature created such a wall around himself that Charles had not really cried since his wife's death. To overcome this obstacle, Nancy decided she could reach his inner mind through his sense of smell, by connecting with an environmental setting familiar to both of them. The use of sense organs by souls complements communication with the subconscious mind. Nancy decided to use her garden, specifically a rose bush, to reach Charles. Case 8. Dr. N. Why do you think Charles is going to react to your presence through a garden? Subject. Because he knows I loved my garden. For him, my plants were a take-it-or-leave-it situation. He knew it gave me pleasure, but to Charles, gardening was just a lot of hard work. Frankly, he helped very little in our yard. He was too busy with his mechanical projects. Dr. N. He paid no attention, then, to your yard work? Subject. Not unless I drew his attention to something. I had a favorite white rose bush by our front door, and whenever I cut these flowers I would wave them in front of his nose and tell Charles that if this sweet scent did not affect him, then he had no romance in his soul. We used to laugh about this a lot because Charles was actually a tender lover, but outwardly you would never know it. To avoid the issue, he would tease me by saying gruffly, "These are white roses. I like red." Dr. N. So how did you implement a plan with roses to let Charles know you are still alive and with him? Subject. My rose bush died from lack of attention after my death. In fact, my whole yard was in bad shape because Charles was not functioning well at all. One weekend he was walking around the garden in a daze and came near some roses belonging to our next-door neighbor. He caught the smell. This is what I was waiting for, and I moved quickly into his mind. He thought of me and looked at my dead rose bush. Dr. N. You created an image of your rose bush in his mind? Subject. Sighs. No, he would have missed that in the beginning. Charles understands tools. I started out by getting him to picture a shovel in his mind, and digging. Then we made the transition to my rose bush and the garden center in town, where it could be purchased. Charles pulled out his car keys. Dr. N. You got him to walk to the car and then drive over to this nursery? Subject, grinning. It took persistence, but yes, I did. Dr. N. Then what did you do? Subject. At the nursery, Charles wandered around for a bit until I was able to draw him to the roses. They were only red varieties, and that suited him. I was projecting a white color in his mind, so he asked a clerk why there were no white roses. He was told red was all they had left in stock. Charles overrode my thoughts and bought a big pot of red roses, telling the clerk to deliver them to our house, because he didn't want to get his car dirty. Dr. N. What do overriding thoughts mean to you? Subject. People under stress get impatient and fall back on established thought patterns. To Charles, the standard rose is red. That's his mindset. Since the store didn't have white roses at the moment, my husband would not deal with it further. Dr. N. So in a sense, Charles was blocking the conflicting images between his conscious thoughts and what you were projecting in his unconscious mind? Subject. Yes. And also my husband is very mentally tired from my death. Dr. N. Wouldn't red roses suit your purpose just as well? Subject, flatly. No. It was then I switched my energy to Sabine, the woman I knew who ran the store. She was at my funeral and was aware I loved white roses. Dr. N. I don't think I know where this is going, Nancy. There were no white roses. Charles bought the red roses and then left for home. Wasn't this enough for you? Subject, laughing at me. You men! The white rose is me. The next morning, Sabine personally drove to my house and delivered a big pot of white roses. She told my husband that she got them from another nursery and that this is what I would have wanted. Then she left Charles standing bewildered in our driveway. He carried them over to the hole he had dug, where my old rose bush had been, and stopped. The roses were in his face. He smelled their fragrance. But what was more important, the wash of white was combined with the scent. My subject pauses tearfully as she recreates this moment. Dr. N, in a low voice. You are making this all very clear. Please go on. Subject. Charles was feeling my presence at last. I now spread my energy around his torso to include the roses in a symmetrical envelopment. I wanted him to smell the white roses and my essence filtering through the energy field together. Dr. N. Was this effective? Subject, softly. Finally, he knelt down next to the hole, pressing the roses to his face. Charles broke down and sobbed for a long time while I held him. When it was over, he knew I was with him still. While the spirits of husbands might use cars or sporting equipment, I find that wives often utilize garden settings to reach their mates. Another client told me about his wife applying the planting of an oak tree to make her connection. Before this widower saw me, he wrote, "Even if what happened to me was not from my wife, does it matter? The main thing is that in some way I am using the emotional energy generated by my feeling she was with me to tap into my inner resources, which previously were not available. I am no longer in an abyss without a glimmer of light." In talking with people about such experiences, which some call mystical, it is important to consider the possibility of a spiritual source. If we can feed into a highly charged state of emotion during our grief, we can both heal and learn more about our inner selves. Spirits may prefer to communicate with us in the form of ideas. Here is a quote from a letter I received from a former client about his departed wife, Gwen. "I believe our session together assisted in his discovery of the best way to receive his wife's thoughts. I've learned we don't all have equal abilities as souls to communicate with each other. Sending and receiving messages is a skill that needs to be refined with practice. I finally recognized the imprint of Gwen's thoughts after getting nothing during my meditations. She was a literary person who used word thoughts rather than pictures to generate feeling in me. I had to learn to integrate word flashes from her into my own manner of speaking, which she knows, in order to decipher what she was telling me. I see more clearly now how I can touch Gwen with my mind." Strangers as Messengers. Case 9. Derek was a man in his 60s who came to see me from Canada to evaluate his life and try and resolve his greatest sadness. When he was a young man, he lost his beautiful 4-year-old daughter, Julia. Her death was sudden, unexpected, and so devastating that he and his wife decided to have no more children. I placed Derek in deep hypnosis and took him to a scene following his last life, where he appeared in front of his counsel. We then discovered that one of his major current life lessons was learning to cope with tragedy. Derek had been deficient in this area during his past 2 lives by falling apart and making life more difficult for family members who depended upon him. He is doing much better in his current life. What was especially interesting for me about this case was a single incident that happened to Derek some 20 years after Julia's death. Derek had recently lost his wife to cancer and was in mourning. One day, feeling very despondent, he walked to a nearby amusement park. After a while, he sat down on a bench near a carousel. Listening to the music, Derek watched the children happily going around in circles on colorful wooden animals. He saw from a distance one little girl who looked like Julia, and tears flooded his eyes. Just then, a young woman of about 20 appeared and asked if she could sit down next to him. It was a warm day. She was dressed in white muslin, holding a cold drink in her hand. Derek nodded but said nothing, while the woman enjoyed her drink and talked about growing up in England and coming to Canada because she was particularly attracted to Vancouver. She introduced herself as Heather, and Derek noticed a glow of sunlight around her that gave the young woman a shining, angelic quality. Time seemed to be suspended for Derek as the conversation turned to family and what Heather was going to do with her new life in Canada. Derek found himself talking to her as a father, and the more they conversed, the more he felt he knew her. Finally, Heather stood up and placed her hand tenderly on Derek's shoulder. She smiled at him and said, "I know you are worried about me. Please don't be. I'm all right, and it's going to be a wonderful life. We will see each other again someday, I know." Derek told me that as Heather walked away and gave him a final wave, he saw his daughter and felt at peace. During our session, Derek recognized that the reincarnated soul of Julia had come to him and provided the assurance he had not really lost her. When we suffer the absence of people we love, they may come to us in mysterious ways, often when our minds are detached in a shallow alpha state. Take these moments as messages from the other side and allow them to bring sustenance to you. Angels, or other heavenly hosts. In recent years, there has been a resurgence in the popularity of angels. The Roman Catholic Church defines angels as spiritual, intelligent, non-corporeal beings who are servants and messengers of God. The position of the Christian Church is that these beings have never incarnated on earth. We think of angels as white-robed figures with wings and a halo, theological images, which may have come down to us from the Middle Ages. Many clients initially think they see angels when I regress them into the spirit world, especially those with strong religious convictions. This reaction is similar to the devotional responses of some people who have had near-death experiences. However, regardless of prior religious conditioning, my subjects soon realize the etheric beings they are visualizing in hypnosis represent their guides and soul companions who have come to meet them. These spiritual beings are surrounded by white light and may appear in robes. In my work, guides are sometimes described as guardian angels, although our personal teachers are beings who have incarnated in physical form long before graduating to the level of guides. An intimate soulmate in discarnate form can also come to the gate to comfort us in times of need. I feel believing in angels emanates from an inner desire for personal protection on the part of many people. In making this observation, it is not my intention to set aside the faith of millions of religious people in angels. For many years, I lacked faith in anything beyond my own existence. I know the importance of believing in something greater than yourself. Our faith is what sustains us in life, and this applies to believing that there are superior beings who watch over us. My case presentations are intended to give weight to the concept of benevolent spirits in our lives. Our spiritual teachers have different styles and techniques, just as teachers on earth. Their immortal character has been matched to our own essence in a variety of ways. The next two abbreviated cases illustrate my contention that personal guides and soulmates, however they are represented, contact us from the other side if we require consolation. Case 10. The following statements come from Renee, a 40-year-old widow who lost her husband Harry 3 months before our appointment. I waited until after our session before asking her the series of questions that follow. My intent was to have Renee contrast the conscious versus superconscious imagery she had of her guide, Nyath. Dr. N. Before our session today, have you had any contact with the being you saw in hypnosis as Nyath? Subject. Yes. Since Harry's death, Nyath has come to me during my dark hours. Dr. N. Did Nyath appear to be the same to you before and after this hypnosis session? Subject. No, I didn't see her quite the same way. I thought she was an angel before, and now I see Nyath as my teacher. Dr. N. Were her face and demeanor different to you while you were under hypnosis, compared to what you saw when awake? Subject laughs. Today there were no wings or a halo, but bright light, that was the same. And her face and gentle manner were the same too. I also see that in our spirit group she can be sharply instructive. Dr. N. More of a teacher and less of a grief counselor, you mean? Subject. Yes, perhaps that's it. Right after Harry's death, she was so sweet and understanding when she came to me. Rushing on. That doesn't mean she isn't nice in the spirit world, just more exacting. Dr. N. Did you do anything to summon Nyath right after Harry's death? Subject. I was crying for help after the funeral. I found out that I needed to be alone and very still, to listen. Dr. N. Does this mean you heard Nyath rather than actually saw her? Subject. No. In the beginning I saw her floating over my head in my bedroom. I had my arms wrapped around a pillow, pretending it was Harry, but I had stopped crying. She became fuzzy after I first saw her, and I realized then I had to listen carefully for her voice. In the days that followed, I heard Nyath more than I saw her, but I had to listen. Dr. N. Does that mean concentrate? Subject. Yes. Well, no. More allowing my mind to go free from my body. Dr. N. What happens when you don't listen properly, but you want her messages? Subject. Then she communicates with me through my feelings. Dr. N. In what way? Subject. Oh, I might be driving alone or out walking by myself, wondering about doing something, taking a certain action. She will make me feel good about it if I am supposed to do it, if it is right. Dr. N. And what if the action you are considering would be wrong for you, then what? Subject. Nyath will make me feel uneasy about doing it. I will know in my gut it is a wrong move. My next case excerpt involves a young man who died in a car crash in 1942, at age 36. He gives us another perspective on the mythology of angels, from a soul reaching back to Earth. Case 11. Dr. N. Tell me what you did for your wife after the crash. Subject. I stayed around for 3 days with Betty to lessen her heaviness. I positioned myself over her head, so our energy fields crossed in such a way that I could soothe her by matching our vibrations. Dr. N. Did you employ any other techniques? Subject. Yes, I projected my likeness in front of her face. Dr. N. Was this effective? Subject. Playfully. Initially, she thought I was Jesus. The second day she was confused, and the third day Betty was convinced I was an angel. My wife is very religious. Dr. N. Are you bothered that she didn't recognize you because of her religious convictions? Subject. Not at all. Then, after some hesitation, Oh, I suppose it would please me if Betty realized it was me, but her feeling better is my main concern. Betty is convinced I am a heavenly deity, and that is okay because I do represent spiritual help for her. Dr. N. Would she feel even better knowing it was you? Subject. Look, Betty thinks I'm in heaven and can't help her. Her angel is able to do so because it's really me. So I'm in disguise. What's the difference as long as my goal to help her is accomplished? Dr. N. Well, since Betty has not connected you with your disguise, is there any other way you can communicate on a more personal level? Subject smiles. Through my best friend, Ted. He consoles her and gives her advice with day-to-day details. Later, I hover over the both of them, sending permissive messages. Subject then laughs. Dr. N. What do you find humorous? Subject. Ted is not married. He has been in love with Betty for a long time, but she doesn't realize it yet. Dr. N. Is this all right with you? Subject. Cheerfully, yet with nostalgia. Sure. I'm relieved he can do what I can't anymore for her, at least until she returns home to me. Finally, there are those angel-like spirits who regularly come to Earth between lives, simply to help people they don't know who are in distress. They may be healers in training, as was true with the client who said to me, My guide and I assisted a boy in India who was drowning and consumed by fear. His parents pulled him from the river and were trying to resuscitate him, but he was not responding well. I placed my hands on his head to quiet his fear, sent a spike of energy into his heart to bring warmth into his body, and superimposed his essence with mine for a moment to help him cough up the water and start breathing again. We were able to help a total of 24 people on that trip to Earth. Emotional recovery of souls and survivors. The last remarks from Case 11 about his wife Betty, and those of Case 3 who talked about her husband Kevin, touch upon the issue of later relationships by the survivor. Falling in love again after the death of a spouse sometimes causes feelings of guilt and even betrayal. In both these cases, we saw that the departing spouses only wanted their surviving mates to be happy and loved. However, just because spirits want this for us does not mean that we can easily compartmentalize our expressions of intimacy to past and present loves. People who have had long, happy first marriages and then lose a spouse make excellent candidates for a successful second marriage. This is a tribute to the first relationship. Having other relationships neither lessens nor dishonors our first love. It only validates that love, providing a state of healthy acceptance has been reached in between. I know placing aside feelings of guilt is easier said than done. I have received letters from widows and widowers asking me if their departed spouses could actually be watching them in the bedroom with someone else. In my summary of the spirit world, I indicated that souls lose most of their negative emotional baggage when they shed their bodies. Although it is true we may carry the imprint of some emotional trauma from a past life into the next one, this condition is in a state of abeyance until we return to a new body. Also, a great deal of negative energy is expelled during the early stages of our return to the spirit world, especially after deprogramming during orientation. When a soul once again returns to a pure energy state in the spirit world, it no longer feels hate, anger, envy, jealousy, and the like. It has come to Earth to experience these sorts of emotions and learn from them. But after departing from Earth, do souls feel any sadness for what they've left behind? Certainly, souls carry nostalgia for the good times in all their past physical lives. This is tempered by a state of blissful omniscience and such a heightened sense of well-being that souls feel more alive than when they were on Earth. Nevertheless, I have found two sorts of negative emotions that exist within souls, both of which involve a form of sadness. One of them I would call karmic guilt for making very poor choices, especially when others were hurt by these actions. I will treat these aspects later under karma. The other form of sadness for souls is not melancholy, dejection, or a mournful unhappiness in the way life has gone on without them since their departure. Rather, sadness in souls comes from a longing to reunite with the source of their existence. I believe all souls, regardless of their level of development, have this longing to seek perfection for the same reason. The motivating factor for those souls who come to Earth is growth. Thus, the trace of sadness I discern in souls is the absence of elements in their immortal character that they must find to make their energy complete. And so, it is a soul's destiny to search for truth in their experiences in order to gain wisdom. It is important for the survivor to know that longing does not compromise a soul's feeling of empathy, sympathy, and compassion for those who grieve for them. Since the immortal character of the soul is no longer encumbered by individual temperament and the chemistry of its last body, it is at peace. Souls have much better things to do than interfere with people on Earth. In rare cases, certain souls are so disturbed by an act of injustice against them in life that they won't leave Earth's astral plane after death until they gain some sort of resolution. I will discuss more of this phenomenon under the subject of ghosts. The spiritual conflict with these souls does not include sadness over you finding happiness with someone else, unless, of course, you did something like murder your lover to be with another. The one great advantage the departed soul has over a survivor is knowing it is still alive and will be seeing everyone who is meaningful to them again. The integrity of souls involves an all-consuming desire that those they love have the free choice to finish their lives in any way they want. If you wish a soul to come to you, it probably will. Otherwise, your privacy is respected. Besides, a part of your energy which you left behind in the spirit world is always there for them. Since souls lose so many negative emotions upon re-entering the spirit world, it follows that their positive affections also undergo alterations. For instance, souls feel great love, but this love places no conditions upon others for reciprocity, because it is given freely. Souls display a universal coherence with each other that is so absolute it is incomprehensible on Earth. This is one reason why souls appear to be both abstract and empathetic to us at the same time. I have heard of some cultural traditions which advise that survivors must let the deceased go and not try to communicate with them because souls have more important work to do. Indeed, souls do not want you to become dependent upon communication with them to the detriment of independent decision-making. Yet, many survivors require not only solace, but also some sort of approval in the forming of a new relationship. I hope my next case will help dispel the idea that the departed are uninterested in your future. Your privacy is respected by the spirit of your love when you are content. Still, if a prospective course of action, particularly bonding with someone else, leaves you unsettled, they might try to make their opinions known. Because of the nature of soul duality, they are quite capable of performing many tasks at once. This includes a soul's quiet time in solitude, where they focus energy on people they have left behind. Souls do this to bring us greater peace, even when we are not calling on them for help. Case 12. George came to me in a state of some distress over feelings of guilt about a new love in his life. He had been a widower for 2 years, after a long and happy marriage to Frances. George wondered if she was looking down on him with displeasure over his developing relationship with Dorothy. I was told Dorothy and her deceased husband Frank had been close friends of George and Frances. Nonetheless, George felt his increased attraction to Dorothy might be considered an act of betrayal. I begin this case at the point in our session when George sees Frances after a former life together. Dr. N. Now that you have entered the circle of your soulmates, who comes forward first? Subject cries out, "Oh, God, it's Frances. It's her. I've missed you so much, dear. She is so beautiful. We have been together from the beginning." Dr. N. You see that you never really lost her in your current life, don't you? And that she will be waiting for you when it is your time to go? Subject. Yes, I always felt it, but now I know. Note: George now breaks down, and we are unable to continue for a while. During this time, I want my subject to get used to hugging his wife again and talking to her through his superconscious mind. He strongly believes that his guide and my own conspired to bring him to this juncture. I explain that the information he will gain should help him move on in his life with Dorothy. The catalyst for this awareness is evident when we start to identify other members of George's soul group. Dr. N. I want you now to identify the figures standing near Frances. Subject brightens. Oh, really? I can't believe... But of course, it makes sense now. Dr. N. What makes sense? Subject. It's Dorothy, and becomes very emotional. And Frank. They are standing together next to Frances, smiling at me. Don't you see? Dr. N. What should I see? Subject. That they have brought us closer together, Dorothy and me. Dr. N. Explain why you think this is so. Subject, impatient with me. They are happy that we have found each other in an intimate way. Dorothy has grieved a long time herself over Frank, and the grief we both feel is being dispelled by having the company of each other. Dr. N. And you see that all 4 of you are in the same soul group? Subject. Yes, but I had no idea this was true. Dr. N. How are Francis and Dorothy different as souls? Subject: Francis is a very strong teaching soul, while Dorothy is more artistic and creative. Gentle. Dorothy is a peaceful spirit and able to adapt more easily to existing conditions than the rest of us. Dr. N: Now that you have the approval of Francis and Frank, what will Dorothy gain from associating with you as your second wife in this life? Subject: Comfort, understanding, love. I can provide her with more protection because I am goal-oriented. I challenge things Dorothy takes for granted. She is very accepting. We have a good balance. Dr. N: Is Dorothy your primary soulmate? Subject: Emphatically: No, it's Francis. Dorothy usually matches with Frank in their lives, but we are all very close. Dr. N: Have you and Dorothy worked together before in other lives? Subject: Yes, but in different situations. She often takes the role of my sister, a niece, or a close friend. Dr. N: Why are you usually matched with Francis as a mate? Subject: Francis and I have been with each other from the beginning. We are so close because we have struggled together, helping each other. She was always able to make me laugh at my serious nature, at my foolishness. When I closed this segment of our session, I felt that George had gained much insight. He was overjoyed at learning that it was no accident he and Dorothy were drawn together. All four souls knew their current timelines in advance. I have had similar information come to me from clients who were not in the same soul group as their new love interest, but were connected as affiliated souls from nearby groups. I find most people know if the person they live with is not a significant soulmate. This does not mean they can't have good relationships with souls out of their group. I will quote the statement from a client who died before his wife in their previous life together. When I reach out to comfort my wife after my death, I do so as a friend and partner. We were not really in love. She was not an intimate soulmate for me, nor was I to her. I have a great deal of respect for her. We needed this relationship to work on those things which played to our individual strengths and weaknesses. So I don't say, "I love you," into her mind because she would know it isn't true. She might then confuse my spirit with her soulmate. Our life contract is done, and if she wishes, I want her to take another person into her heart. Reuniting with those we love. It is fitting that I close this chapter on death with a case illustrating what it is like for soulmates who reunite on the other side. The case involves a widow who meets her husband at the gateway following a long separation. Case 13. Dr. N: Who meets you right after death? Subject: It's him, Eric. Oh, at last, my love. Dr. N: After calming my client: This man is your husband. Subject: Yes, we are coming together right after I cross over, before I see our guide. Dr. N: Tell me how everything unfolds, including the way feelings of endearment are transmitted between you and Eric. Subject: We start with the eyes, from a little distance away, looking deep into each other. The knowing of everything flowing between our minds, of all that we have meant to each other. Our energy gets sucked up into a magnetic pool of indescribable joy, blending the two of us together. Dr. N: At this moment, have you both assumed the physical form you had in the last life? Subject, laughing: Yes, very rapidly we start with the first time we met, how we looked to each other, and move through the phases of body changes during our long marriage. It's not definitive because we don't settle on just 1 year of our life together. It's more swirling energy patterns right now. We even pick up on other bodies we had together in previous lives, too. Dr. N: Were you usually female in those lives? Subject: Mostly, yes. Later we will revert to a mixed gender pattern, because there were good times in our past lives when he was female and I was male. Pause. But it is just fun right now to be the people we were in our last life. Note: my client asks me to please not ask her any more questions for a few minutes. She and Eric embrace, and when she speaks to me again, it is to describe how their energy flowed together. Subject: It is an ecstasy of coalescing. Dr. N: This spiritual passion sounds almost erotic to me. Subject: Of course, but it is so much more. I can't really describe it, but the rapture we feel for each other comes from all our contact together in hundreds of lives, combined with memories of the blissful state we spend reunited between lives. Dr. N: And how does the blending of your energy with your husband make you feel afterward? Subject bursts out laughing. Like really wonderful sex, only better. Then, more seriously, you must understand that I died as an 83-year-old sick woman. I was tired. It was a long life, and I was a cold stove that needed warming up. Dr. N. Cold stove. Subject, yes, I need energy rejuvenation. There is always a transfer of positive energy when we are met by our guides, or by someone we love. Eric sparks up my tired energy. He lights a fire inside me to make me whole again. Dr. N. When this meeting is over, what do the two of you do? Subject. Our teacher comes to welcome me back, and I am escorted through the mist to our center. When a subject tells me that re-entering the spirit world has the effect of being made whole again, this requires qualification. We receive an infusion of new energy from soulmates and guides, who may also transfer part of the energy we left behind back into us as well. However, as I said when discussing spiritual longing, complete wholeness will not take place until our work is done. Despite this, being restored to what we were before the life began is like feeling whole once again. A subject put it this way: death is like waking up after a long sleep, where you had just a muddled awareness. The release you feel is one that comes after crying, only here you are not crying. I have tried to show death from the perspective of the soul in order to ease the pain of those left behind. As Plato said, once free of the body, the soul is able to see truth clearly, because it is more pure than before, and recalls the pure ideas which it knew before. Survivors must learn to function again, without the physical presence of the person they loved, by trusting the departed soul is still with them. Acceptance of loss comes one day at a time. Healing is a progression of mental steps that begins with having faith you are not truly alone. In order to complete the life contract you made in advance with the departed, it is necessary to rejoin the rest of humanity as an active participant. You will see your love again soon enough. I am hopeful my years of research into the life we lead as souls may assist survivors in recognizing that death only exchanges one reality for another in the long continuum of existence.